I loved your idea about doing a separate podcast just about the mistakes we've made. I think I would definitely be your co-host on that one.
You're listening to Rambling Realtors with Andrew Roach and Ross Bridges. Tune in each week for in-depth conversations on all the latest real estate trends and the thriving West End GTA markets. Go beyond the real estate world as Andrew and Ross share personal and professional experiences to help you find your way home.
I know you do quite a bit when it comes to stocks and other things as well too. And I thought one of the things that we're seeing, you know, we're towards the end of our pandemic journey. Hopefully things are going to be becoming a lot more. We're looking for normalcy. You know, what I got my second shot now. Feel like you were going golfing with some buddies last week. Things are starting to open up, right? But like one of the things I thought we could talk about would be like finding opportunity in times of uncertainty. You know, we've seen some crazy kind of trends and some things that got accelerated from COVID, even though a lot of things felt like they were completely put on pause for the better part of a couple of years. There's also a lot of things that we know now are going to get accelerated, right? So I thought we could talk about what's going on with the trends and the activity in Canadian Ontario real estate. And then we could also talk about some companies that we're really seeing that are, you know, leaps and bounds ahead of the game because they got to take advantage of, you know, being in the pandemic.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's, you know, no matter what the situation, if you know one sector or one party or, you know, whatever, if there's something that's suffering, there's opportunity somewhere else, right? It's a pendulum. It's the I don't know what those things, you know, the old scales, right? When one comes down, the other side's going up, so to speak, right? So, you know, like you were just kind of touching on, whether it's a stock market or it's companies, right, that you might trade. I mean, let's look like here. You know, we're recording on Zoom right now. Zoom exploded in COVID, you know, right? And so, you know, one has to then argue to say, you know, if it exploded when everything was locked down, when everything frees back up again, will it still be as dominant a position? I would say likely not, right? You know, online shipping and all that kind of stuff, right? I think that our entire society has been kind of like moving towards that as it is anyways. I think that you know, you did get some spikes in some like the Amazon and all that kind of stuff. Other online shipping companies, you know, FedEx. I mean, if you look at the stock market, if you just look at, you know, where the S&P 500 was a year ago, of course, this would have been the bottom almost from the big catastrophic drop that we had, the huge sell-off. But we have not only reached that previous level, but, you know, surpassed it on a grand scale. You know, so you look at like FedEx and all that kind of stuff, or any shipping companies. Yeah, they exploded over the last year as well, you know, but as things open up and as trends change or evolve, maybe might be a better word, you know, not necessarily just a straight up change, you know, different opportunities will present themselves, right? There's been the argument many times about everybody moving out of the GTA because you can work from home, right? There is an argument to be made that once everything opens back up again, that yeah, there will be some positions that'll be like, okay, you can continue to work from home, and some might say, okay, you can work from home for 2 or 3 days a week. But I have to think that there's going to be a majority of companies that are going to say, okay, we tried that for a while. We really need to kind of bring it back into, you know, face to face, you know, again, it's something to be said about being around people, being around your team, and not just being, you know, on a Zoom call with someone. There's that idle chit chat that, you know, just chatting, talking about someone overhears that, ideas, you know, blossom, you know, from that, right? I think that companies or industries or whatever, you know, might miss some of that, you know, that team camaraderie and you know, that meshing, so to speak, where if everybody is virtual, right?
You look at companies like Google, for example, right? In terms of how they've changed the infrastructure of their businesses, where they've created such a fun, all-encompassing, state-of-the-art building where you can do a little bit of everything, right? And I think we're going to see that become a little bit more urbanized, like, more in the city. We're seeing like companies like Staples that are creating more of these workspaces where you can get out of your house, go down the street, and you have a place to work. And I think we're going to see that trend where you got a gym there, you got your cafeteria, you have that all encompassing. So it's designed, companies like Google, you're there and you're there all day, all night. You can go for a nap. You can come back to work. You can kind of have that all. So I think, and we're going to see that in condo living as well too, where there's going to be designed areas where you can go and work. You can work out, you can play, you can eat. And I think that we're going to see that landscape change. Big things that I think will potentially happen is I see a big turnover happening in commercial in the next year or two, where with commercial buildings, there could be a lot of opportunity where a lot of these businesses potentially go out. And, we're seeing like things like ghost kitchens that are happening, but why not buildings get retrofitted into smaller designs of what you and I were just talking about, right? Because who the heck doesn't, they want to get out of the house. They want to go and socialize and have that lifestyle. And it could be a work live, or it could be a live work, right? It could be somewhere you could go and work and you could have that all encompassing and within that community. Or it could be that's your home, right? And you can go downstairs and you can work. And the efficiency, I think one of the things that we've seen more now than ever is efficiency, right? We're seeing less travel time. We're seeing more work getting done. For some people, there's a lot of distractions. You've gone through it with you're a teacher now too, right? You're doing a lot with your children. I'm seeing my brother-in-law who's like an incredible worker, who's now has the dynamic of he's got 4 little boys running around while he's trying to keep himself mentally sane, right? So there's that balance. You need to go, and like what you said, you're plugging in with your team, and you're using all of those powers of that camaraderie of that ability to brainstorm and get on the same page to better your company, to better your work, to be visionaries.
Yeah. So you're right. I think that with everybody moving out of the GTA, we might see the pendulum swing back again. You may see people coming, okay, the commute is too big now because I thought I could work from home for more often. Some people will be okay with that, right? Because there's something to be said about like kind of, it's a quality of life, if you will, right? Maybe not for the commuter that's now commuting 3 hours a day round trip or more, but for the kids, having a big yard, being able to ride their bikes around, having some discretionary spending money because your mortgage is smaller. Or we've had probably a couple handfuls of clients this year that are now mortgage free, right? Or very close to it, right? Like their goal was mortgage free. Now they got to carry $100,000, but a lot of them are in their late 30s, early 40s, and to be mortgage free. That's huge, right? So they may stick around, and it's just like, okay, well, that's the price to pay, or they may say, listen, I don't really want to do this anymore. Let's grab another mortgage and move back into the city, right? So it'll be interesting to see how this evolves, and of course, it's not going to be all or nothing. It's not going to be everyone either stays or everyone goes. There's going to be some people that come and go wherever, right? But you touched on the condo, like kind of like workspace. They've been building those, for a couple of years now, where a condo building will have like meeting room workstations, little cubicles kind of like built in, and you can like I guess I'm gonna say rent them out, but like reserve them is the word I was trying to say. Be like, okay, I'm gonna reserve a workstation, right? And you have like a meeting room, or you have like these little quiet cubicle kind of things where you can get out of your condo unit, so it feels like you're going to work and you're not working on your bed. I think you just need that kind of like that change of scenery to be like, mentally, I have now gone to work, right? And I love those, like the idea of those like shared workspaces, especially for like people like our kind of industry, right? Real estate or mortgage brokers or insurance brokers or people that don't necessarily like they're independent salespeople, but you don't necessarily have an office per se, right? Now we do have an office at our brokerage, but it's not big enough for all of us, and nor does it need to be big enough for all of us because we're not always there all the time, right? So it's there, but I love the idea of that kind of shared workspace, right? You might see the same people all the time, and then it kind of goes hand in hand with the innovation center ideas that Milton has an innovation center, McMaster or Hamilton has an innovation center where you're getting people from similar kind of industries or backgrounds or whatever, but not identical. And there's some collaboration that ends up happening, right? Because again, you end up just, chatting with somebody in the lunchroom. They're over here. Hey, what are you doing? What are you working on? Oh, that's interesting. Well, that's what I'm doing. Hey, what would be cool if we did this together? Right. And that happens. That's the whole idea. Right. And so I love that idea. I love the idea of doing these shared workspaces and kind of gives people a place to go, meet with clients if you have to for a meeting room, have a designated spot. You can rent a place for like maybe $500, $600, $700, $800 a month, whatever the case may be. I think it's cool. I really wish there was more of them. I think there's opportunity for more of them, but heck, real estate prices are ridiculous.
No, I mean, if you think about it, I think we're going to see it. We're going to see an opportunity now, like I mentioned, with commercial real estate, where some brilliant companies, I think, are going to be able to do some retrofit designs and supply and demand. What is highly in demand right now? So that is one industry curve. And we've already seen it on larger scales. They could make it smaller scales and I could see something where that becoming very, very popular in Toronto, in major cities like Hamilton, Milton, Oakville, Burlington, maybe as we see a little bit more expansion. But I think the one industry in real estate, and even though we are residential real estate agents and we don't talk about it a lot, that I have seen flourish the most during the pandemic has been light industrial real estate. It has gone through the roof. And I mean, let's face it, storage demand, you're looking at these companies like Amazon, right? They are looking for space. They are looking for space, and the demand for that has just been astronomical. So it's there's tremendous opportunity for that. So if we're looking for, and let's face it, you and I have both seen residential real estate skyrocket through the pandemic. I had clients that lost out on a home, 11 offers that came in South Burlington, so much for our lull we were talking about, well over 300,000 over list, right? So and it was priced pretty good. It was priced pretty well, right? It wasn't priced
like only 200,000 under market value, anticipated market value.
Maybe 150 under value, right? Like it was listed at 1.5, and it was probably like in my eyes, like fair market value was a little over 1.6. But the driving markets and the demand, right? You're seeing it, the demand for entering into beautiful communities like South Burlington and getting into Burlington, getting into Milton or Oakville. It's the demand, right? So, but light industrial, industrial, I think that space where people are looking for the warehouses, they're looking for the outdoor storage, it has just gone on a tear. Not necessarily something that you and I face on the every regular day, our dealings with our clients, but something that's just being bonkers, off the charts.
Yeah, I mean, well, Milton's been dealing with that for, I don't know, like a decade, I would say, right? Like it seems to us that there's some grumblings in our community about how like nothing else is being built other than light industrial, right? And of course, I guess the town can't really come along to somebody and say, oh, you bought that land, no, you can't buy that. They can work with zoning, etc. But we would love to see, jobs created locally rather than just like some low income forklift drivers, take, this massive building and you're only hiring, 50 people, instead of it being like, a smaller building, more density, et cetera, and hiring some good high paying jobs. But I mean, it seems like that's all they're doing around here is just building light industrial storage space, et cetera. Right. So there's tons up here. And it just seems like every day there's a new building going up, and then it's for lease, and then bam, it's gone. Somebody comes in and leases the whole thing or half of it, whatever, right? So, yeah, there's that's around, and again, it kind of goes with, again, we're not going to really focus in on this, but you're talking about just how things kind of change, etc. That's something that you're into. You just kind of look for the zoning, look for the opportunities. Naturally, we're going to want to be close to 400 series highways, so you can move the product in and out pretty easily and efficiently, right?
Yeah, and I don't see it as much down Oakville Burlington Way. There are a bunch of places just off the QEW, off the service roads, that you'll see where there's the demand. But I mean, as the expansion of Milton, as it goes out towards the 401, and there's a lot more open land, of course, there's going to be tremendous opportunity with like what we've talked about before with transportation, with the expansion of the 401, right? So that does make sense for that. It's easy routes off of many highways. But as we're here talking about, finding opportunity in the face of uncertainty, there is a lot of opportunity, even though as we see prices skyrocket, we're definitely seeing all these trends that are relating back to real estate and changing the landscape of how we do, not only how we live our lives, but of how businesses are exploding, right? So
yeah. So and we talked, on some other shows a little bit about investment real estate, et cetera, right? Like a lot of people reaching out right now saying, okay, I want to buy an investment property, and whether that's because the value of their house has gone up substantially, so now they have access to the down payment, or because they've seen the big run up of prices and they're like, hey, if only I had have thought how much money I could have made, right? Again, I would caution, buying at the top, unless it's a long-term plan for you, right? And do your best to buy for cash flow. But there's some other. In fact, I'm staring at a duplex on my screen right now that I just sent to a client of mine that's been on the market for, let me tell you, 37 days.
Okay.
Right? There's some good cash flow there. Now the thing is, it needs a little bit of work. The agent probably didn't play that game properly. It's tough with tenants, especially two tenants, to work around both of their schedule to allow showings and 24 hours notice and all that kind of stuff, right?
What city is that in, Andrew?
This will be in Cambridge.
In Cambridge, yeah. Good value in Cambridge for sure.
Yeah, I mean, one of the gripes that I find about KWC is like, in Milton, during this whole kind of pandemic thing, the big workup of prices this year in 2021 is that it was pretty common to, for agents to list the house 100,000 under market value, right? 100, 120, sometimes 150, but you could see those ones, the outliers that were just listed way, way lower, right? But it was pretty common to be 100,000. Man, in KWC right now, they're listing like 200,000 under market value. So it's challenging, right? I've got a couple of buyers that are first-time buyers, got a tight budget, trying to get into the market, and you're seeing stuff listed at 375, and they're like, oh, look at this one. What is this one? I'm like, sorry guys, that's going to be close. That's going to be close to 6, if not 620, right? Like it's challenging. It's so
property you're talking about in Cambridge, though. I mean, just get perspective for potential investors out there. When as realtors, when a property is tenanted, we know right away that it's almost like in our heads instinctively, we're like, oh, this could very easily become more difficult to sell, right? So depending on your client and their objective, if they want to sell it quickly, it's not like we're going to be necessarily, there's more opportunity there because it's typically, you don't see as many showings. You're finding like typically they're just like, I just want it to be priced accordingly. So I find like homes like that where they're tenanted, whether they're multiplexes or just your single dwelling, I think that there is more opportunity to be had than a vacant home where you can get lots and lots of people through, or a family home where, people know they can't be in the house during the showing. So typically I would see tenanted properties, there's a little bit more opportunity.
Yeah, it can be challenging both ways for the for the seller and for the buyer to try to get access. It can be difficult for a buyer. You have to go in with a different kind of lens on, right? Because a lot of times buyers, especially if they're looking for themselves, if it's tenanted, if it's a single family home that's tenanted and they're looking for themselves, they're going in and they're you're buying with your emotions. And we almost always buy with our emotions, and we always try to coach our clients on putting your emotions in check, because when it's all staged and pretty and everything like that and you fall in love with it, when you move in, it's going to be a vacant house. It's going to be walls, flooring, and a kitchen, right? Like, so don't get too excited about how pretty it is. But that being said, we're emotional creatures, right? So when you're walking into a property that's tenanted, you are an inconvenience to that tenant. You are putting them out. Usually they're there. Usually it's not as clean. It's not as capped. You're an inconvenience, right? So it's awkward for the buyer to walk in and the house isn't kind of like all done up and pretty and there's dishes and stuff like that. And it's even more awkward when the tenant's there. And they're like, they're sitting in the living room being like, staring at you, right? Or just like, I'm just going to watch some TV here, right? And all you want to do is get out of that room. And then you walk upstairs and like, okay, thank you very much, bye, right? And you never emotionally, connect with the house. So if you are buying an investment property, or sorry, if you're buying that as your single family house, or personal residence is what I was trying to say, you walk in with, the expectation that it's not going to be as pretty. Let's look at the layout. Let's look at the size of their furniture in comparison to your furniture. Let's look at the finishings, right, etc. Paint we can do afterwards, no problem. You can change out some floorings, or what's the condition of the floorings, etc. Do you like the layout, etc. Right? But to your point, you get a good opportunity there, right? But some sellers are like, they see that the neighbor just sold for $1 million, and they're like, well, I want $1 million too. And I'll sit on the market for 37 days or 78 days and just wait, right? Sometimes the sellers, if they're not in a hurry either, right? Like, oh, you know what, I'll sell it, right? But flipping gears a little bit, if you're buying as an investment property, do you really care? You should be buying as an investment property, is you're running the numbers, right? What are these numbers like? And then there's the old adage, cash for keys, right? So you can't kick a tenant out, but if you say, I'm going to buy the property, you can ask for vacant possession, see if you can negotiate that. If the sellers will buy the tenants out, or if you walk in there and you say, you assume the tenants, you say, hey, listen, I'm thinking about renovating this unit. I'd like to renovate the unit. I'm looking at this unit. It's listed at, it's renting for just a little over $1,100. I would say on the low side, market rents for that would be 13, right? So probably, but maybe even 13, 14, potentially even 15 if it was stunning, right? So there's opportunities there, right? So you might say, listen, I will pay you. I'll give you your last month's free, and I'll give you an extra month's free to, if you leave. I'll pay your first month's rent at your next house, kind of thing, right? So you're paying them out, but long term it makes sense because you're going to eat a few $1,000 up front, but you get them out, and now you can boost rent by $300-400 a month.
And getting an N9 form signed so that you know that they're actually going to move out, right? No, I mean, going back to it, it's a business transaction, right? So at the end of the day, we want to make sure our clients feel very comfortable going through the home, incredibly emotional, but we want to try and take emotion out of the equation so that we can focus on seeing the business transaction. And there's nothing more distracting than, we say eliminate certain pictures and certain things in the homes that can completely distraction. But what's more distracting than a tenant in the home, right? It makes it very awkward. And now some people can be very accommodating. They can go wait in the backyard. They can make sure they're getting out of the way, and you don't feel like you want to feel like even when you tell your clients outside, oh, there's going to be people inside. Instinctively, they're like, oh man, like they don't get that opportunity because it is something you want, that privacy. You want that chance to go through and explore and visualize yourself and not feel rushed and not feel like you're being gawked at throughout the whole process of seeing this is the home for you. But for an investor, you can look past that. You can say, yeah, this is fine. Maybe I've got built-in tenants. Maybe this is going to give me more opportunity, and it turns a lot of people off. So for the right consumer, there's great opportunity there.
Yeah, for sure. It all depends on what you're looking for, right? Whether it's an investment property, again, focus on cash flow, not necessarily the pro, how nice the property looks and makes you feel, right? And again, if you're looking for yourself, look for those outliers, right? Like when I'm looking for the people that have a tight budget, I'm doing a search for, that things that have been on the market for a week or more, because I know that there's still, easily half to three quarters of listings are holding offers still, right? So, if their budget's 600,000 and it's listed at 575, well, I know that it's gonna go into competition. Well, I shouldn't say I know, but there's a very good chance it's gonna be in competition, and it's gonna go over their budget, right? So just looking at stuff, and there's a lot more stuff, right? But at the same time, sellers aren't being like, oh, okay, well, it's not on the market, I'm just going to or I didn't sell it in multiples on offer day, I'm just going to dump it. A lot of them are listing low, they don't get offers, and then they just relist up where they think it should sell, and they'll sit on the market for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, until somebody comes along and says, okay, they negotiate, right? But we're not seeing that big kind of like drop off, right? The numbers are still kind of creeping up. I think buyers are maybe a little bit done with the multiple offers. They're just being a little bit more patient potentially, right?
Yeah, and I mean, the sad reality is that home prices will continue to climb this year. Like, I think they could go up anywhere from another 5 to 10%. We had some clients that were looking at pre-construction homes, and a lot of those have been flying off the shelves, right? So I think which fuels the resale market. Construction is down because of COVID, put some kind of hold on some of the builders, so they haven't had the freedom that they wanted to do. So we're kind of seeing it all encompassing, where there is more demand right now for resale because of lack of pre-construction, because of lack of future construction. It's just taking a little bit longer. We all know during COVID, everything's taken a little bit longer to kind of get things in place, right? So what is driving our market? You and I talked about it several times. We're going to see the millennials that are going to continue to drive our market. We're going to continue to see immigration, people that have already been in our country for a few years, they're excited about their opportunity to buy their new home. Yeah. Or what we're going to see, as we talked about in the big smoke in Toronto, where we're going to have a lot of new immigrants coming into the country that are going to be fueling the rental market. They're going to be moving into these condos, and that's going to create a surge for that condo market. So we're definitely not seeing things slowing down right now, right? And you and I have talked about that. We're in a very strong market right now, and it's going to continue. Maybe not as crazy as we've seen it, but it's still pretty crazy out there. It's still pretty crazy.
You're right. I mean, I joked about this. I don't know if I was joking it with you or somebody else, and I was like, okay, so we're not Mach 3 anymore. We're Mach 1, but we're still going pretty darn fast. Right? It seems like it's slowing down, and yeah, it is, but it's still, the market is still very strong. It's still very strong, and at the end of the day, interest rates are still very low, and we haven't had the effects of the stress test really kind of like play out just yet. From what I'm seeing, buyers have just adjusted. Maybe they were already qualified ahead of time, or they were already putting enough down, or they were already smart about their ratios, and their price point didn't change, their budget didn't change, because so I've got some clients here that have, they're from the get-go, they were qualified at 650, 660, right? But they were looking at 580. 590. The highest they went was 600, right? So the stress test didn't affect them at all, because they're still buying in their comfort zone, not at their limit, right? And so I think there's still, I think there's probably a handful of those. And you know what? Millennials are I think maybe more educated and smarter than we were, right? I mean, I know that I went all out when I bought my first house. Now that was, a story between Lisa and I, because I grew up moving every 4 years, and she had one house her entire childhood, right? So, I had the assumption that we were going to buy a starter home and then we are going to move and then we are going to move and then we are going to move and then we're going to move. And then I find out as we're home hunting that she's like, no, I don't, this is going to be a forever home. I'm like, what? So I'm like, well, I need the double car garage and I need the, I need the finished basement and da, 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 da. So we bought a 5-bedroom, 2-car garage, 2,800 square foot house for 2 of us. Right. So yeah, we pushed the limits and, beyond our comfort zone so that we could get into the housing market. Now, lo and behold, 7 years later, we move. But
Took you that long to convince her, eh?
well, she wanted a pool because she reminisced about her childhood growing up. Her grandparents had a pool, right? And I wanted more space, just like everybody else, right? Just like every other young family in Milton, anyways, that are buying a house with these little postage stamp backyards. And we had 3 kids, and so then there's not really much to do in the backyard. You can't have a pool. You couldn't really have a trampoline or any toys back there. You can't really ride your bikes, do anything really in the backyard. So inevitably it was in the front yard. It was on the sidewalk, and then there's cars driving by and you're nervous and and then you're like, you can't just, anytime they want to play, okay, I got to go and sit on the front porch and watch them, right? In the backyard, you can at least kind of like have the door open and you can kind of like, do some stuff in the house as they kind of like played in the backyard. You're not doing that in the front yard. Right. So I wanted more yard. She wanted a pool. We moved. That's the way it worked.
No, I talked to a few mortgage specialists over the last week. And I mean, one of the questions we like just in conversation is, have you seen the stress test affecting the markets? Like, have you seen any changes because of the stress test? And I think you said it perfectly there. If you've been budgeting and you're good with your money and you had a plan and you knew exactly where you're going to be, then it's not really affecting you, right? It's for people that are trying to extend themselves to that fullest extent. And then all of a sudden they're like, no, but I think for certain people that are like, this, now's our opportunity, now's our chance. There's been a lot of people waiting on the sideline. And no, I don't think we're seeing that what we thought it would potentially do, where it would maybe calm down the markets. Yeah, there's a lot of people that can only afford up to a certain threshold, but they still want a house, right? So like you said, interest rates are incredibly low. So we're still seeing a lot of people wanting to enter into the market. And as we're getting into the dog days, a summer right here, and then it's the inventory question, are we going to see a huge influx of homes coming on the market? Who knows, right? It depends on segments. We've talked about segments in the market too. So what can we anticipate in certain pockets of Oakville, Burlington, Milton, Cambridge, Kitchener, Waterloo? What can we anticipate in those certain areas? Like, there's huge demand in certain areas, typically driven by, location, where in terms of how their commute's going to look, or the pools, the schools, the parks, all of those things that are really, really driving it. So yeah, that continued demand is there.
All of that. It's the interest rates are low. It's immigration that whether the immigration was down from typical years, still happened through COVID. We still brought in immigrants, 100,000 or a couple 100,000 in 2020, 2021, last year, whatever. But more importantly, the people that have been here for 3 years before that are now ready to buy a house, right? Millennials, all that kind of stuff, right? So there's just lots going on, right? There's lots of demand still, and then the COVID restrictions on supply, right? Like you said, everything's slowed down. You said that a lot of people are buying new builds. I was flipping through Facebook the other day, and a friend of mine posted on our story, it was an email that she got from her builder that she had bought, and they were delayed substantially in phase 1, and she bought phase 2, right? So phase 1 was delayed substantially because of COVID, and now phase 2 will also be delayed because phase 1 was back. They're not going to start phase 2 until they finish phase 1, and it's a bit of a domino effect, right? And so I think as we I'm hoping that as vaccinations, get around and things open back up again, that bottleneck of the supply chain will ease, right? And manufacturing lumber will come down because you'll be able to get more transportation, et cetera, right? Like hoping that all of that will kind of like open up and we'll get a little bit more of a free flow, happening, right? So I don't know. Time will tell.
Big time, big time. Well, I was also on when we started this episode. I thought a cool thing to talk about would be some of the trends that we're seeing with all businesses. We mentioned on Zoom, and I'm thinking, you know what? We could save this for our next episode. Leave a little bit of a teaser. We've got a couple guests that we're going to be bringing on in our next handful of episodes. We're pretty excited about that, and I think we could go on to talk for our next episodes about the trends and some of the things that we're seeing with who have been the big winners. Not as much maybe real estate related, but some of the big businesses that we've seen that have been big winners throughout COVID.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of them, and like I said, that pendulum could swing, right? It could be from, they were big winners, and now that everything is starting to open back up again, you're going to see the sell off, right? They were like Zoom shot up, Spotify shot up. There's a bunch of companies that just took off.
I did crazy, yeah.
I just took off, right, and then they started to ease off, right? So. We'll see, and inflation. We'll see how that works, right? Following the 20-year Treasury, right? That's the ticker on that is TLT. That's as you look, if you think of like the bond yields, et cetera. Ultimately, if they're going to give me like 1.5% as an example, right, and I'm going to give them money, and they're going to give me 1.5% per year, but if inflation's at 2%, then I'm losing money, right? So then I'm going to sell that off, right? I don't want that, and then the price of that's going to go down so that the yield goes higher, so that I'm making 2% or I'm making 2.5%, because if I was to buy it at $100 and they're going to give me $1.50, if I buy it at $80 and I still get $1.50, that yield is higher, right? So, you watch that. I think there's a lot of talk about inflation protection investing right now. A lot going on in the energies, green energies, even just natural gas, like all the kind of like, think about like inflation protection type investments that you're going to want to probably be moving into. Don't forget that everyone, like every country around the globe, for the most part, has been printing money like crazy. And we're now in the fiat system since the 70s, right? It's not backed by gold. It's not backed by anything other than the people's confidence in that particular government's ability to repay that debt, right? So, if everyone's printing money, inevitably, it's going to start at the top. It ends up going to the richest people first because they have the business sense, and they own the companies and all that kind of stuff. But they start spending it, and it trickles down to the middle class, and that's when we're going to start to see that inflation, I think, right? So keep an eye on it. Energy inflation in Canada went up, had a big jump, mostly driven by energy, given that we are a large energy exporter. But watch that in the other stuff as well, right?
And I think one last thing to touch on too is, what we talk about uncertainty is in terms of the consumer confidence right now. There are we are hearing rumors of new taxes that are going to be targeting seniors, typically in terms of their higher earnings and being able to disperse and to pass their money forward. Maybe it's on to children and so on and so forth. So we're definitely seeing the government is looking at creative ways to have new forms of taxes. So I don't think that's going to do anything good for consumer confidence when there's uncertainty. Starting with the top with their our forefathers, the generation where they're holding on to their money for security, and now the government's going to be implementing more taxes. So that's a little bit scary.
Yeah, that's what we need, more taxes.
Right.
I remember what I was going to say earlier. It was rent prices, right? We were talking about the drive for housing, right? When renting a house costs you substantially more than your mortgage would be. Yeah, okay. If you don't have the down payment, that's another thing. reach out to Ross or I. We've got great connections with mortgage brokers. If you don't have the down payment, there are programs in place for borrowed down payments, all that kind of stuff. So if that's a concern of yours, like, hey, I'd love to get in the housing market, I just haven't saved the down payment yet, there are programs for that. So reach out. But what I was going to say is, like, if you're, I mean, I'm going to talk Milton numbers here because that's my bread and butter. But if you're looking at, like, $3,000, $3,500 a month to rent a house, right? I mean, your mortgage payment would probably only be like 2,500, 2,000, like, depending on, again, what you bought, whatever, right? But that's the other thing about it is if the alternative is renting and it costs you an arm and a leg, then naturally there's going to be a big driver to get a house, right? I think that it doesn't make sense to me to rent. I know there's a whole bunch of people that sold off when this market went crazy and I thought, I'm going to rent for a couple of years. Yeah, and that worked in 2017. Some people got lucky. Some people timed it perfectly. Some people didn't time it perfectly, but it worked out for them, depending on when they got back in the market. If they got back in the market because they were expecting an even bigger drop. There's one thing that's certain, and it's whether it's the real estate market or the stock market, trying to time the top or trying to time the bottom is nearly impossible. And the only time, like you've said it before, Ross, the only time you're going to know is when you look back at the data and say, okay, that's when the top was, or that's when the bottom was. Right. So
just to complement what you're saying too, and this would probably work more up in your market, like Cambridge, Kitchener, Waterloo, maybe not as much Milton. I was fortunate enough to convert my basement into a rental apartment, but and we talked about this in our investment series, there's tremendous opportunity if you're creative out there where you can convert either a semi-detached, detached, potentially a townhome, and you can get get some rental income from your basement, and you're not going to be able to find anywhere cheaper to live if you're being creative with that regard. So that's a really, really good option for anyone out there. Maybe it's your second home and you've got some equity. If it's your first home, like Andrew just said, I think that was brilliant of you to bring up, is there are these programs right now where they can be assisting with down payment. So government funded programs that are out there to assist people. So let's take advantage of it while that opportunity is there.
And it's actually not even always government assisted necessarily, unless you're talking about like being like insured by CMHC. But there's programs where you can either borrow the down payment as long as that down payment fits within your debt service ratios, or there's cashback mortgages, right? And yes, the interest rate is going to be higher. Like, nothing's for free, but don't forget we are in ridiculously low interest rates right now, right? So if you got to pick up a mortgage at 3.5%, and all your friends have it at 1.5% or 2.5% or 2%, sorry, is what I would say, and you're thinking like you're getting hammered, it's still like basically free money. If inflation is around 2.1, 2.2%, and you're only paying 3.5%, I think more about the fact that you got a house and you didn't have to put any of your own money into it, right? Rather than what your interest rate's going to be, right? I mean, it wasn't too long ago that interest rates, the average 5-year was 3.79, 3.89, 3.99. That was only a few years ago, right? And people loved it. They were like, "Oh my god, my interest rate's only 3.7%. That's crazy. Look at how cheap it is." Right? It's kind of like it's how fast things are going, and it pulls back, and you think it's it's still going fast. You think it's slowed down. It's still going crazy fast. You think of interest rates of how low they are now. When they rise, like, oh my god, interest rates are so high. No, it's just that interest rates were just ridiculously low for too long.
And we talked about the stress test a little bit. If you're feeling a little bit more aggressive, then maybe you're going to be looking at that variable interest rate, versus if you're more conservative and you're worried about what things you're going to be doing over the next 3, 4, 5 years. Yeah, sure, get a fixed interest rate. But the reality is there's a huge opportunity right now with interest, like we talked about on one of our last episodes. 10 years ago, we talked about how huge a discount mortgages were at 3.5%, 4%, 4.5%. Let's go back into the 80s. People were 16, 17, 20% for their mortgages, right? And they're telling us, like, I remember when I had my mortgage at 18%. And now you're telling me you can get a mortgage for well under 2%. Well, take advantage and ride that wave. And if anything, you're just going to build some strong equity for a handful of years, right? Whether it's 2 years or 5 years, that's your call.
Yeah, and that's a good point too about like the building equity thing, right? Like, I would say like Lisa and I bumped up our payments, so that our amortization ends up coming down substantially. So we took advantage of the prepayment privileges, right? So you can boost your payments by a certain percentage and put lump sum payments down. Sometimes the intention to put a lump sum payment is there, but when it comes down to it, you've kind of forgot to save and you spent it on something else. But when you increase your payments by a percentage, like 20%, on a regular basis, and it just comes out, yeah, it's kind of your forced savings, right? So while interest rates are ridiculously low, any additional payments we put on it is 100% towards the principal, right? When interest rates are a little bit higher, a portion of your payment goes to interest, a portion of your payment goes to principal. So, I'd be, doing your best to pay off your mortgage now when interest rates are really low and more of your payment is going towards principal versus going towards interest, right? Those days of, 15, 16, 17, 18, 20% interest, probably half of the payment was going towards interest alone and nothing was coming off of your principal. Mind you, I mean, you bought the house for probably only like $220,000, but even still, I mean, there was an argument to be made a few years ago of even though prices are crazy high right now, the cost of living is actually cheaper than when you bought a $170,000 or a $250,000 home in the 80s because of where the interest rates were, right? The amount of payment that came out of your pocket was a lot higher then, even though the prices were a lot lower, right? So, like you said, take advantage of these low interest rates on multiple fronts, and not just being able to buy the biggest house that you can, but being smart with your money and paying that back.
And for first-time buyers, like, honestly, clean up your finances, pay off your car debts, do whatever you got to do to have your best credit rating. And for existing homeowners, there are some very creative ways if your mortgages are coming due or you're looking at refinancing, ways of being creative for maximizing, getting more equity to buy another property. Look into your options for getting a larger home equity line of credit, and take advantage of the low rates now while you can if you're looking at getting a second home. I think there's some tremendous opportunity right now. And maybe you could give some insight with your background and obviously being in mortgages. What are a couple creative ways that you can think outside the box for, other than what we talked about with what the banks are offering for, being able to find some money for down payments? What are some other creative ways that we can all think outside, like along the lines of what I was talking with refinances, home equity line of credits, foundmoney.com? Where are we going to find some additional money to put down on some homes?
Well, I guess it depends on what
bank of mom and dad is maybe not open. So
right. I guess it depends on what the goal of the property is, right? One thing that I wish that I had have done when we bought our first house, and some of the things that I've told a lot of first time buyers, past clients or just people that I've chatted with, is on your first home, buy a duplex. Right? If you're used to living in the basement apartment of someone's house, or you're used to living in a tiny condo, one thing, I'm not a very patient person, and I've never been a patient person, and I wish that I had, is, and I would pass that along. Be patient, right? If you're 20, I don't know, 20 something, 25, even 28, buy a duplex, live in the smallest unit, rent the biggest unit for a couple of years. Then maybe switch, or if you can, when the time comes, when the property is appreciated, and maybe you save some money or you refinance it to go and buy your personal home, you keep the duplex, right? And that's something that I wish that I had have done, or just repeated. Okay, I buy a duplex. I live in the smallest one for a couple of years. And then I buy a triplex, and then I live in one of those units for a couple of years, right? And then, I just would have repeated that, and until I got to the point where I had kids and I needed the extra space. But like I said, I shared with you, like, Lisa and I had different ideas about what our home was going to look like, and we didn't talk about that nearly enough. We didn't have long discussions. We didn't talk about if this then that kind of thing. We kind of just were like, hey, we're going to buy a house. I went in with my expectations. She went in with her expectations. And it wasn't until we were, I don't know, like a month or so into looking for houses that it came up that we had different expectations about what this house was going to be for us.
And right? You were both realtors representing yourselves. You didn't have that.
No. That was well before we got into real estate ourselves. Okay. She was a massage therapist. I was working at Toronto Hydro.
Okay, cool.
So, and then I bought her first house, and then I quit Toronto Hydro and became a mortgage broker. So that's something you do: buy your first house and then quit your job. But yeah, don't follow my path. I follow the path that I would recommend. Anyways, that's what I would have done if I could go back, talk to my younger self, and I would have said, do this, right? I would have said, because we were living in a basement apartment and it was fine. We were comfortable because it's home, right? Okay. It's home. And home is what you make of it, right? It was where you live, is where you kind of like put down your roots, whatever. It's not necessarily about the big, the flashy. And I think there's too much, with social media and TV and all that kind of stuff, the keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak, right? And everybody wants the big, massive house with all the toys and the vacations and everything, and they want it yesterday, right? And I feel like we could have been where we are now, like easily 10 years ago, if we had have started smarter, right?
Well, you're doing pretty damn good, and I think we all learn from our mistakes, and I think that's part of the reason we're doing the show. Like, I've made so many mistakes when it comes to financing and things in life. I could just start a whole other podcast for that. But the reality is we want to share, like, how can people do things a little bit faster? I know personally, there's been a lot of equity that I put in my home that wasn't an asset, right? It was something I was doing for personal enjoyment of my home. I think the smartest thing I ever did was convert my basement into a rental. I think that was a very, very smart move. I was always err on the side of caution. I always did a fixed mortgage, and I always did 5 years. And that was a mistake. That bit me in the butt. If I could go back and tell myself, and again, you can't predict the future. You don't know what the markets are going to look like, but I would have had a lot more control and freedom, and I probably would own another property if I always did a 3-year variable, right? It would just give you more opportunity to kind of refinance, look at your equity, look at your situation, buy another property. I love what you said about the multiplex, right? And then, there's that big watering hole in my backyard there, that big pool. That was something for the enjoyment of my life, but I could literally be sitting on a beautiful second investment property if I didn't do that. I don't regret it, but in terms of, you're looking at assets and financial freedom. So for people out there that want a pool, buy a house with a pool. Easier said than done, because there might be more of a bidding war on that home. But those are just what's that?
Especially these days, right? Like, that's what everybody wants right now. Is there, if it's got a pool, you're easily getting into multiples,
even if it's an above ground pool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think we should end her there. That was another beauty.
Yeah, I know it's always fun to chat and to share, and sometimes it takes us down these little rabbit holes. But I could have gone on to that for a long time, a lot more. I loved your idea about doing a separate podcast just about the mistakes we've made. I think I would definitely be your co-host on that one.
That would be X-rated for some of the stories, so we'd have to change the solicitory, whatever it's called on that, right? The rating. Yeah. I don't think we make it PG. We're trying to keep this PG, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, until next time, we got to nail down the schedules of our guests. That can always be a challenge here, but we're going to get some good ones on here soon. So stay tuned, and we'll see you on the next episode.
See everybody.